remaining of that collection is over at the Thomas Jefferson building at the Library of Congress. About 2/3 of it was lost in a fire around 1850, but we have been recollecting his collection ever since. Mr. Jefferson is 19 feet tall, and that is significant because Freedom, who stands on top of the Capitol, she's 19.5 feet tall, and since no man can stand taller than Freedom, none of the statues in D.C. can be either. So
clever.
Mr. Jefferson is 19 feet tall, Mr. Lincoln is 19 feet tall. It's sort of an unwritten rule here in D.C. If you have no other questions, we will move out front. Did you get enough? You want to take a couple pictures?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Sorry. Oh yeah, this one. I'll take one of this. Time for evening sunscreen.
So if you take a moment to look back at the entrance here, we have this piece of artwork in the pediment up there called the Decoration. And up there are the 5 gentlemen who are responsible for writing the Declaration. Can you guess who is up there with Mr. Jefferson?
Is that Ben Franklin?
Ben Franklin.
Oh.
Madison is not there.
John Adams?
John Adams.
All right, that's 2.
Yep. No, he's not there. So the other 2 are a little more obscure. They're Roger Sherman and Robert Livingston of Connecticut and New York. And all of them had written draft declarations, and so that's why the Continental Congress decided to make them the writers, and Adams was in charge. And he's like, that redheady kid, I'm going to pull him in here. And he's pretty smart, because Adams wasn't very popular. And so Jefferson does most of the writing. Franklin and Adams contribute a lot of the ideas, and the other 2 guys just basically sign off on the draft. And it took about 3.5 weeks to write the Declaration, and I think it was Jefferson who did all of that writing, and there's no scratches out. He didn't make any mistakes. It turned out pretty good, the one with everyone's signatures on it. But ironically, when it came time to sign the Declaration, Robert Livingston thought it was too early to send it to the king, and so he doesn't sign the Declaration of Independence. So he misses out on this huge moment in history, even though he helped write it. Yeah, pretty cool. Or disappointing in his case. Across the Tidal Basin here, we see the White House, and it was Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, who was in the White House when this memorial was built between 1939 and 1943. And this was supposed to be the location of a Teddy Roosevelt Memorial, but the other Roosevelt was in the White House, and they were on 2 sides of the political aisle. And he said, nope, we're not doing that. We're not putting Teddy there. And he picked Thomas Jefferson here. They might not have always seen eye to eye, but he sort of idolized Jefferson. And Teddy is on an island out in the Potomac River, so he did get memorialized, just not in this location. And Roosevelt had all the trees cleared out between the White House here and the Jefferson Memorial, so you could see Jefferson's face when he woke up in the morning.
Wow.
And originally, the Washington Monument was supposed to be built on axis with the White House and the Capitol, but the bedrock wasn't sufficient here in this location, so they moved it in the direction of the Capitol building, and it turned out to be serendipitous. Now we can see across from the White House to Jefferson. So it all worked out in the end.
That's cool.
Now to the right of the White House, behind the Washington Monument and all those trees, stands the Treasury
that statue there?
No, not that one. It would be there next to the White House. Hamilton. That's exactly right.
Oh.
So well done. So you missed our first question, but we are playing for glow sticks tonight.
Oh.
Okay.
So if you know the answer, don't hesitate. Just shout it out.
Okay.
We'll see if we have a winner.
So there's a
at the end of the
Hamilton.
tour.
There's a Hamilton statue at the Treasury.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
That's
Yep.
cool. I didn't know that.
Yep. He's on one side and Gallatin is on the other. Now
Okay.
Gallatin was French-born, but he was a mastermind with money, and so he did a lot to transform things after Hamilton's days in that role. Your earring looks like it might fall out.
Oh,
so
this
the
one?
other one. The
This
other
one?
Yeah. So I just want to make sure.
Thank you. And it did. Fresh it. Oh man. I must have lost the back somewhere.
So you'll notice a lot of construction going on at our memorial today. 2026 is our country's 250th birthday. And so the rush is on to get things finished. Now, the bathrooms and the elevators reopen here at the beginning of the summer, and the museum is supposed to be done by 2025. Over at the Lincoln, they started a little bit after this
So where's the Teddy Roosevelt statue?
It is just west of the Kennedy Center. It's
Okay.
called Roosevelt Island today. It was before that it was Mason's Island, and before that it was had a Native American name that I can't remember at the moment. So he's out there. You have to access it from the Virginia side of the river.
Okay.
But there's a memorial out in the middle of this island dedicated to him. There's like 4 pillars, and he's standing there with his hand in the air. And he started the national parks and things like that. So it's a pretty fitting setting for him.
He's out in nature.
Yeah. So
He'd like that.
all this fencing here and the yellow boom that you see out there in the water is the restoration to the seawall here at the Tidal Basin. So the Tidal Basin was built in the 1890s. We had a catastrophic flood here in the 1880s that made its way all the way up to the ellipse in front of the White House because the river went up to 17th Street, which is the main road at the base
Wow.
of the Washington Monument. And so they built this as sort of a release valve to keep the White House flooding. Because the Potomac River is a tidal river. It's connected to the Chesapeake Bay. So we have high tides here twice a day. And for many years, this wall here has been underwater twice a day with the tides. This spring, Mother Nature put on a display, and the water got all the way up here to the lawn.
This spring?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I tried to give this tour, and I had to walk all the way around. And the rangers were like, "You can only go that way if you have a boat and some paddles." So, but over the last 130 years, the seawall here has sunk 5 feet into the mud, and sea level has risen a foot. So that red line there is the first phase of the seawall project. They're going to raise it about 5 feet, and they're going to build it so that it can be added on to the future. But all of this land from the Lincoln Memorial here to the Jefferson and beyond was all reclaimed from the river by the Army Corps of Engineers in the 1880s. So this is basically river mud, so it makes sense that the
Rivers
walls have sunk over time.
The river's trying to take it
Also
back.
home to our famous cherry blossoms that bloom every spring. They first arrived here in 1910 at the request of First Lady Helen Taft. And they received 1,200 trees that came through the port in Seattle and made it by train here to DC. And by the time they got here, they were all diseased with parasites, and they had to burn them all.
Oh no!
And so a new batch of trees was sent in 1912, and they were planted here around the Tidal basin. All the trees here are descendants of those original trees. And they took out about 150 trees along this stretch for the renovation work, and they've already started regrowing them.
Okay.
Ready to go. Are you from North Carolina?
I live in Durham.
Okay. I recognize the area code.
Oh yeah, I could tell. Go Wolfpack.
Yeah. I'm still feeling this way. I grew up in Charlotte.
Oh, cool.
In fact, my parents are still there. They think it's the center of the universe. Most of Charlotte feels pretty highly valued. I laugh because the basketball court at the arena says Charlotte, USA.
Yeah.
We're not even counting the state. It's Charlotte. It's rare to find a native Charlottean these days.
That's true.
Transplants from New Jersey and
It's the same in Raleigh.
yeah. We considered moving back a couple times. Now we're kind of stuck here.
To give the tours.
Well, yeah, I give tours, but my husband is an architect and works for does civic and government work. So
Okay.
that's kind of where that happens.
That makes sense. Would you go back to Charlotte or Raleigh?
We were going to move back to Raleigh. We had a job offer and everything, but we decided to stay put. For better or for worse, because that was right before the big crash and the depression back in 2008.
Oh yeah.
There were 350 architects on the streets without work here in DC.
Oh no.
But we would have gone down there, we would have gotten a house we couldn't afford,
Yeah.
and then he would have gotten laid off.
Yeah. So good luck. Good choice.
So, we stayed here. For better or worse.
FDR. Old FDR. Information, prologue, first term, second term, third term, fourth term.
So we made it here to the Franklin Delano Roosevelt. in the end of it because no one wants to end their tour over at the Jefferson Memorial. It's too far away. So we're going to be going through this memorial sort of in reverse chronological order. And Roosevelt was president from 1933 to 1945. And in fact, he was elected president 4 times. But he only served 12 years because he died a few months or a few weeks into that first term. So how was he able to get elected 4 times?
Before one of the amendments.
Right, to set the term limits. That's the 22nd Amendment, and it was signed into law in 19. Previously to this, everyone had sort of followed George Washington's lead. He served for 2 terms and went back to being a private citizen, and everyone else did too. But Roosevelt was leading our country during a very tumultuous time in our country's history. And so he kept running and people kept electing. And that's how we have our only 4-term president. But we see here on this wall, this is sort of our finale wall of the memorial. And it comes from his 3rd inaugural address. And it's known as the 4 freedoms. Freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom of freedom of here. And this is what he wanted for our country and the world. This is sort of his vision and his legacy. And he actually does a pretty good job of making this happen as we come out of World War II and head into the 1950s. Things are going pretty well after the Great Depression. People are moving out to the suburbs and buying automobiles and things like this. So he did a pretty good job of doing that. When, of course, he was president, when the Jefferson Memorial and a few others were being built, and someone asked him if he would like a memorial and what he would want. And he said, well, something about the size of this. He put his hands on his desk. It could be granite or limestone or whatnot, and it should read in memory of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He put it on that little patch of lawn out in front of the archives building. And that's exactly what he got in 1965. This is on the Pennsylvania Avenue side of the Archives building. It's made of the same stone as his tombstone up in Hyde Park, New York. And the donors for this, their names are hidden in the base of the foundation of this, so we don't know who gave it. But we totally ignored his wishes, and about 42 years later opened the largest memorial in Washington, D.C. To anyone. This memorial is 7.5 acres.
Wow.
And it's made up of 4 rooms, each representing one of the terms in office. And we're standing in the 4th room, very generous. We're coming out of World War II. And the fountain here has a lot of water in it right now. It's usually a little more calm than this. It's very placid and peaceful. The designer envisioned people stepping out on the stones and interacting with the water. And each room has a water feature that sort of sets the tone for that term in office. We have, it's a very sensory memorial. We have the roughness of the stone, the volume of the water, and then different trees bloom at different times of the year. So there's even different smells and fragrances in the memorial. It's also handicap accessible. This was the first memorial that opened after the American with Disabilities Act. So it's very universal experience. But not all is as it appears. There's some oddly angled stones here in the waterfall, and those sort of allude to the trouble that would lead to the Cold War in the future. So not everything is peace and prosperity coming out of World War II. Our next stop will be over by the Eleanor Roosevelt statue, and as we walk over there, we'll bring you some pictures. And take note, there's a timeline of the president's life on the front of the stairs there, from when he was born to when he came down with polio, became governor and president, and then died. So it's a unique feature of this space.
Oh, so that's the timeline written on the stairs. Wow.
Thank you.
That was fourth term, United Nations. FDR believes the failure of an international organization after World War I led directly to World War II. Under Roosevelt's urging, representatives from 26 countries signed a declaration by United Nations in 1942. After FDR died, Eleanor Roosevelt served as a delegate to UN. She chaired the commission that adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Room 4 fountain. The unorderly blocks represent the uneasy stability. The two adversaries remain at odds in the second half of the 20th century. You can press this for an audio description, and it's in Braille. So lots of nods to handicap accessibility at the FDR Memorial. Very good. Born 1882, Hyde Park, New York. Marries Eleanor in 1905, 21, got polio, never walked. Unaided, never walked unaided. I'm sorry, guys.
Roosevelt, only statue to a First Lady in Washington, D.C. In fact, she has two. There's another smaller version of her up at the Washington National Cathedral. And she might not have wanted to be included here at this memorial because she and Franklin didn't have the best marriage. She had affairs, and but divorce was political suicide at the time, so they made it a political agreement and stayed married. And they become a political partnership, and she becomes his legs and his eyes as he becomes stricken with polio in 1921 at the age of 39. He's never able to walk unassisted, so he teaches her how to, sort of run recognizance and bring stuff back to him. And she really transforms the role of First Lady in her time in office. So I think she deserves to be here. My question is, what other government position did she hold other than being First Lady? The only question with a hint.
Oh, I don't know. So?
Yeah.
Oh, it's there. Delegates.
Yeah, she was the first U.S. delegate to the United Nations and actually helped pen the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we see her dressed much like she would have been during that time, with the fleur-de-lis pin on her blouse, the rings on her fingers. Although her coat would have had a fur collar, but our friends at PETA objected, and so they took it off the top. But I think she is well-deserved and glad she's included.
Photo.
So here we have the funeral cortege bas-relief behind me. Again, Roosevelt died early in his fourth term. Roosevelt moved the inauguration from March to January because he thought the lame duck session was too long. So a couple of his inaugurations took place in March. This one was in January. And then about 10 weeks later, he suffers a massive cerebral hemorrhage down in Warm Springs, Georgia, where he liked to go to rehabilitate his legs. and he dies later that day. It was around April 12th, April 13th, and throws our country into deep, deep mourning. And we see that here. We have the lead horse draped in black crepe, the casket there behind, and then the American people filing behind the casket in grief and over their lost president. Now, going into this fourth term, Roosevelt's health was not good. But only those on the inside knew how poor things were. And if they had known, they probably wouldn't have elected him for the fourth term. And of course, puts poor Harry Truman in the difficult position of ending the war. And he'd never even heard of the Manhattan Project before Roosevelt passes away. But he made the decision to drop the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which end the war. We also will take note of the still pool of water here, which represents death at the memorials here in Washington, D.C. And we'll see that elsewhere in other memorials as we head across the mall this evening. So, question.
Why does he have the biggest memorial?
It has a really big story to tell, and that's probably why. The next biggest one is the World War II Memorial that is just over 7 acres, but it's very compact, whereas this one's long and spread out. This memorial is made of red granite from South Dakota, which is different from all the white memorials that we're used to seeing. It took 210 truckloads to bring it all here.
Wow.
And there's enough stone here to clad an 80-story building.
Oh my God. Cool.
And as you go around the corner, you'll see the biggest stone here in the memorial. Weighs over 15 tons, and is near Roosevelt. Showing his stability, his strength, his leadership.
More than an end to war, we want an end to the beginning of all wars. So we are going backwards. It says fourth term, 1945. So this is the third term, I guess. Aw, puppy.
So this term is his third term in office, and this is the term where we go to war. World War II, he's campaigning for this term, promising that he won't send American boys to a foreign war. Because he says, I've seen war and I hate war. What it was going to cost us, because he was Assistant Secretary of the Navy during World War I. So he knew, both economically and in lots of life, what it was going to mean for us to go to war. But he also knew that unless the Allies performed a miracle, we were going to get sucked into the war in some way. And so the water feature here, imagine it's a dam that's been hit by a bomb, and the stone's been thrown out here into the plaza.
Oh, wow.
I hate war written on those stones. This is symbolic of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And of course we declare war on Japan the next day and Germany a week later. And so the Japanese sort of forced the issue.
That's such a clever idea.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So this is the only room where we have a likeness of Mr. Roosevelt. And he is here wearing a naval cape. He was a fan of all things Navy, even though he was never a commissioned officer. He loved being on the water. Of course, that's another reason why the water is in all of the rooms, because he would go to Warm Springs for the rehabilitation properties of water. But water was always an important component of his life. And he used this cape not only to keep him warm at places like y'all said, but also to hide his disability from the American people. He wore big, heavy braces on his legs. And in fact, this chair has wheels on the 4 legs, like casters, so that he could be wheeled into position. And his cape would hide the fact. And so he went to great lengths not to show that to the American people. While they knew he'd had polio, they weren't really fully aware of the nature of his disability. But we also see him here with his dog, Fala. This is the only memorial to a presidential pet, as far as we know. Aww. And Fala was the president's best friend. He was adopted as a puppy, and he was a very privileged pooch. He got a dog biscuit every morning on the president's breakfast tray. He traveled with the president, went to cabinet meetings, actually attended the president's funeral, and is buried next to him up in Hyde Park, New York. So the question for you is, what kind of dog is Fala?
A Scottish Terrier.
That's right. A Scotty dog. And Eleanor took him in after the president died and took care of him for the remainder of his life. His name was used as a shibboleth during World War II, which was like a secret code word to determine if someone was a spy or not. And a politician tried to blame something on the dog, and he said, "You leave my dog out of politics. He has nothing to do with it." So you can tell he gets a lot of love, how shiny his ears are. But he adds a bit of whimsy here to a very serious face. There's that big stone. That one probably took a whole truck.
Did you put this in the bag? Thanks. Have you ever been here before?
Years ago. It's been a while. And I didn't know about the whole each section representing a different current. That's cool.
The Gates War. But then the dam got blown up. Oh, you can see where I hate war is written right there. Got a picture of that. That's amazing. Yeah. It's just the 3rd term. Oh, wow.
So this is one of the fountains that you usually have to yell over between the plains and the fountain. This room is where we start talking about the New Deal.
Okay.
And but to talk about the New Deal, we need to go back a little bit in history to sort of lay the land here. And Herbert Hoover gets inaugurated in March of 1929, and then, of course, the great stock market crash happens in October of that year, which throws our country into the Great Depression. People are losing their jobs, they're losing their homes, and they're moving into these shanty towns on the side of the road called Hoovervilles. And people feel like Hoover isn't doing enough for them to help them in this difficult time. And so Roosevelt sees this as an opportunity, and he runs against Hoover, and he promises himself as a New Deal for the American people, maybe not fully knowing what that meant, and actually comes to the point where the New Deal had a three-pronged purpose. One was to put people back to work. The second was to fix our broken banking system. And the third was to create a safety net for the most vulnerable in our society. What New Deal program did he create for that purpose? Yeah, Social Security. So, I always tell kids on the tour, you may not see it, but it's there. We may not get to use it. I don't even know if I'm going to get to use it. So, but this room talks about all the New Deal programs. Now, it was an alphabet soup of acronyms. There were 54 programs involved. They included the Tennessee Valley Authority, where they're building dams along the Tennessee River. The Hoover Dam was built during this time, the Golden Gate Bridge. This panel talks about the Civilian Conservation Corps. These were 20-something men who were basically a large construction crew. And they would go to places like national parks, build a camp, build the infrastructure for the park, and then move on to the next one and start over again. But on the weekends, a group of traveling musicians and actors would come and entertain them.
Aww.
So Roosevelt was trying to put everyone back to work. Even teenagers had after-school jobs during the Great Depression. And that's what these panels here on the wall represent. A lot of the jobs he was putting people back to work doing. And we see, electric lineman, boat builder, miner, sculptor, farmer, mechanist, and then the faces and the hands that pop out of them are supposed to represent the dignity of, restoring the dignity through work to people. And then there's a list of programs on the lower right-hand corner of the first panel. You'll also notice there's Braille here.
Yeah.
And, but it's twice the size of readable Braille for a blind person. But the artist wanted you to touch things here. And the Braille is a list of all of those acronyms. And then these columns here in the plaza are the dies that made these flat panels on the wall, much like a Play-Doh rolling pin. And again, the artist included them here because he wants you to touch them. And this is my favorite panel because it looks like Reynolds Auditorium or Reynolds Coliseum at NC State or Cameron Indoor.
Yeah.
Because they were built on the same plan,
Okay.
but NC State's building has 2 extra bays, so our building is long and skinny. But very similar to both Cameron and Reynolds.
That's awesome. Oh, thank you.
Sure. So we're still in the second room, the second term in office. And these vignettes here show what's going on socially in our country. He said he saw 1/3 of a nation ill-housed, ill-clad, and ill-fed, or ill-nourished. And out in the heartland of our country, crop prices fall with the stock market crash. The Dust Bowl happens during this time period, and people aren't able to pay the mortgages. And this couple here has lost their land, their livelihood, and their legacy. And you can see the despair here on their faces.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in cities, things weren't much better. Men were losing their jobs, and they would dress in the morning like they were going to work so their neighbors wouldn't know. But they'd go stand in these soup and bread lines hoping that they would get food, because usually only about the first 50 people in line would get anything to eat or drink. Even Al Capone, the famous gangster, was supporting food lines in Chicago. And I read that nationally the unemployment rate was 20%, but in cities it was closer to 30%.
Wow.
And that 95 people died of starvation in New York City in 1931. And we don't think of starvation as being an urban problem.
Yeah.
You know? But when this memorial opened in 1997, most of the people who had survived the Depression were no longer with us. And so these were teaching tools to show us how desperate, how scary things were during that time period. And so when we have a bunch of 8th graders lining up with smiles on their faces, they're kind of missing the point. This was a difficult time. But the vignette behind me, over in this niche over here, is a counterpoint to the despair that we see here behind me. This is called Hope, and we see a gentleman here listening to a radio. Now, President Roosevelt used the radio extensively throughout his time in office. They would report when he was going to be on the radio in the newspaper, and people would put it on their calendar. They would gather around a neighbor's radio or go to the movie theater or the general store to hear what the president had to say. And he would tell them what was going on in the country, empathize and sympathize with them, and try and give them hope that we were all going to get through this if we worked together. So what was the name of his radio show?
Fireside Chats.
That's right. Well done. Did you say that as well?
She said it first.
No, you said it first.
No, you tied. I just wasn't sure if Jonathan said it too. So you each get one.
Oh, thank
You're
you.
welcome. So, fireside chats. And this may have come because maybe the president had a little bit of stage fright, and it was easy for him to imagine a family sitting around the fireplace listening to the radio versus the millions and millions of people who were actually listening to him. He went on the radio over 50 times during his 4 terms in office. And in fact, Eleanor used the radio as well. She spoke to the people on Pearl Harbor Day, and the president didn't go until the next day to deliver the day which will live in infamy speech.
Wow.
So they used the radio quite effectively. He started using it as governor of New York. And this is a little deceiving. That radio probably cost $450.
Oh my
so
gosh.
to have like one guy sitting around listening to the radio, it's probably not that realistic, you know.
Yeah.
That was a really expensive. Like, this was before television, so like that was the technology. So it wasn't cheap to get one. But important that it's included here.
I got more water.
I'll refill it. There's bottle refillers. I'm just taking some Tylenol.
Oh, good.
Extra strength. I love that the FDR Memorial is handicap accessible.
Yeah.
I think it's a good, you know.
The museum we were at today was pretty good about that too, with the
Oh,
lights
yeah.
and stuff.
Because it's a modern museum.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you notice there, like, there's Braille on all of these, and if you press the button, they do an audio version too.
Love that.
Yeah. If any memorial needs to be handicap accessible, it should be the FDR Memorial. Fireside chat guy at the radio.
I wonder if we had any other persons with disabilities, or see, there must have been. I mean, number-wise, right? There must have been.
I mean, yeah, maybe somebody like before people could tell.
Yeah.
Maybe. Reagan went senile in the end.
Uh-huh.
That's the sun. The only thing you have to fear is fear itself. I know that one.
And speaking of hurricanes, we were supposed to open here on and dedicate the memorial on August 28th, 2011. But earlier that week we had an earthquake.
Oh my God.
And on that weekend of the dedication we had a hurricane. And we were in no shape to be hosting a big event. So they had to postpone the dedication to October of that year. But they were going to host it on the anniversary of the March on Washington in August, and it just didn't work out. But The impetus for this memorial was Martin Luther King Day being signed into law. Which president did that?
Ooh.
JFK.
He died before.
Oh.
Before it got signed into law. So who's president right
Was it
before?
Clinton? Seems like,
No.
H.W. Bush? Am I going in the wrong direction?
No.
It wasn't George Bush, was it?
Not Ford?
Nope.
I'm out.
Carter.
No.
Ah.
It's Reagan. Reagan's
Oh,
always the
wow.
last person that people guess, but it was Ronald Reagan who actually signed it into law. Now, he wasn't a big fan because he's like, if we start giving holidays to people who aren't like political figures or war heroes, then everybody's going to be asking for them and we're going to be giving them out willy-nilly, and he wasn't a big fan. And he also thought that the federal employees had enough holidays.
Oh,
But
gosh.
he also knew that he didn't have the political wind at his back, so he goes ahead and signs it. And we first recognize it in 1986. And to deal with that holiday issue, they combined the two presidents' birthdays into President's Day in February, Lincoln and Washington, and give the extra holiday to January to make it Martin Luther King Day. But it was another 28 years before this memorial gets dedicated. Now, everything here in the memorial is based on something Mr. King wrote or said. We have this 450-foot long curved wall, which comes from a quote that the arc of morality is long, but it bends towards justice. There are 6 quotes referring to love and hate on this side, 8 quotes referring to justice and injustice on the far side, and all of them are labeled where he wrote them. If there's no label, he wrote them from jail. So take a few minutes to read some quotes, and I'll meet you down inside the memorial.
Make a career of humanity with yourself to the noble struggle for equal rights. And make a greater person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in. We are to peace on earth. Our loyalties must be ecumenical. Rather than sectional, our loyalties must transcend our race, our tribe, our class, and our nation. And this means we must develop a world perspective. Out of a mountain of despair, a stone of hope. Oh, West Highland Terrier. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Overriding loyalty. Jesus. We are determined here in Montgomery to work and fight until justice runs down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. So I like that they made this monument kind of a monument to his words, since he was such a great orator. So like most of this space is taken up by quotes. We must come to see that the end we seek is a society at peace with itself, a society that can live with its conscience. True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. 1958, no label, so it was written from jail. Also, small update, this camera died in the first room of the FDR Memorial, and there's stuff about the New Deal, and we got to the end of it, and there's a prologue room, and it's a life-size sculpture of him in a wheelchair that he made of his own design. It's a dining room chair with tricycle wheels on it, because the Americans with Disabilities Act protested after the FDR Memorial was built that there are no depictions of him in a wheelchair as disabled, and the creator's like, well, I did it the way they did in history because he worked very hard to hide his disability. But eventually those protests won, so they made that prologue room, and it's just him like as a life-size person in his wheelchair. And it's also the reason that the memorials all have those ADA accessibility like tables where you can push a button and hear an audio description, and they have 3D models of all of the monuments. It's really cool and thoughtful. There he is. And here's the MLK Memorial, which I think is the newest memorial here. What's he looking at? He's looking at the Jefferson Memorial over there, staring him down, along with Hamilton, somewhere by the Treasury. Hamilton and MLK are staring Jefferson down. Very interesting. Just for the week. So I'm having the DC trip I never got in middle school.
Yeah.
Visiting as many of the things as I can. Definitely wanted to do. I'm doing a Georgetown food tour on Friday, and this monument tour.
Yeah.
Which,
are you local or from?
Yeah, local from Silver Spring.
Okay. As you read some of the quotes, you may have noticed one of them was written in Norway. What was King doing in Norway?
Nobel Peace Prize.
That's exactly right. Now, I really like, but isn't that Stockholm? But he probably did a tour. Hit several stops along the way. But 1964 was the year that the Civil Rights Act was signed into law, and it was also the year after the March on Washington. So he did receive the Nobel Peace Prize for that. Here we see what is known as the Mountain of Despair. It's made of 159 stones of Chinese granite, and out of the center of that stone is the Stone of Hope. You can see the scratch marks on the sides of the stone representing the effort it took to push the stone out into the center of the plaza. And on the face of that stone is the likeness of Martin Luther King. Now, he is 29 feet tall, which breaks with the 19, but he's not a statue, he's a sculpture. And he's sculpted here in situ, which means he's still part of the stone. What does that represent? Exactly. You had a guess?
Well, I was going to say something similar.
Yeah. It also could represent that his life was cut short because he was 39 when he was assassinated. He'd be in his early 90s today if he were still alive. His sister died last summer at the age of 95, so he could have lived that long. Now, if you were to draw a line from the Jefferson Memorial to the Lincoln Memorial, Mr. King is standing on that line. And here we call it the line of leadership. Three different figures from American history who, changed the course of history. They might not have all agreed, particularly King and Jefferson, seeing as how Jefferson owned hundreds of humans over the course of his life. But you'll note that Mr. King isn't looking at the Jefferson Memorial. He's looking off to the right, perhaps to the south where he was from, or maybe to the future where his children would be judged for their character and not the color of their skin. He's standing there resolutely, speech in hand, and this is pretty prime real estate here along the Tidal basin, and also, of course, these are the world famous cherry trees, which, depending on the year, might bloom around April 4th, which is the anniversary of his assassination. So everything was considered. The ceremonial address here at the memorial is 1964 Independence Avenue, which is kind of convenient that it does line up with 19th Street on the other side of the mall, but ties his history and the memorial. So it's not in a temple like so many of the others that we've seen, so the weather is another component here of the memorial.
Yeah.
You get a beautiful blue sky. Looks different when it's cloudy. Depending on the time of year, the sun shines on his face in the morning, and then in the late fall, you'll get the sun on the side of his face in the evenings. So all components that make this memorial special.
So thoughtful.
Yep. The water falls on either side of the mountain come from a scripture passage, Amos 5:24, that justice will flow down like rain or water. And so again, everything was thought through.
Yeah.
So this is sort of the halfway point of the tour. So if anyone needs a restroom, we can hit the visitor center across the street, and then we'll keep moving. Or you can take a couple minutes if you need to read more.
Does the visitor center have stuff like refill water bottles or something?
Yeah, there's a bottle filler there. There's restrooms, although by now the gift shop is closed. But there might still be a ranger if you want to stamp your National Park token. So. Veterans Memorial. And it opened in 1995, 13 years after the Vietnam Wall opened. And that was too long for these veterans. They felt ignored, they felt forgotten, and often the Korean War is called the Forgotten War because it was between World War II and Vietnam. Most people didn't even know why we were there, and it was a very short war, and so it's considered the Forgotten War. So when this opens in 95, the veterans here finally felt seen and acknowledged, and so it was really important and meaningful for them. In 1995, what was most people's touch point for the Korean War? You guys are young, so you might not know.
North Korea?
It's pop culture.
Oh.
MASH. Yep. So, MASH was supposed to be set in Vietnam, but they thought that was a little too close because it was the Vietnam era. And so they set it in Korea, but we're dealing with all the social issues that were going on in Vietnam at the time and in our country. And so that's most people's sort of reference point for the Korean War. But the number 38 is very important at this memorial. Do you know why?
Attitude between North and South Korea.
The 38th parallel. Yep. That's the result of this conflict, the division of North and South Korea. The conflict was also 38 months long. So 38 was real important. So the war lasted from 1950 to 1953, and basically it didn't really end. They just reached a stalemate, and that is the demilitarized zone, the 38th parallel, dividing the Korean peninsula. Now, the communists were supporting North Korea, and the UN was supporting the Koreans, and so not a world war, but it was a UN coalition that was supporting the South Koreans at that time. And so on the north path, there you see the 22 United Nations member countries who served with us in Korea. This memorial is based on a 38-degree angle, and the original design called for 38 soldiers to be within that angle. But they thought that was be too crowded, so they cut the number in half and then put up this highly reflective black granite wall to reflect their images to create 38. So we have 14 Army soldiers, 3 Marines, 1 Navy corpsman, and 1 Air Force forward. They represent 5 different races, and they're a platoon marching out of the forest into a field of rice paddies on high alert for landmines. So you're being watched as you walk through the memorial from every direction. On the
this is
south
the
path
forest.
here, on this highly reflective wall, are what looks like the mountains of Korea from a distance are actually 2,400 photographic images that have been sandblasted into the wall of servicemen and women who served during this conflict. They're all broken up by branch of the military, Army, Navy, and Air Force. At the top of the ramps is a still pool of water, and the theme of this memorial is that freedom is not free, and that these young men and women went to defend a country they didn't know and a people they'd never met. In 2021, the trees up in the plaza there had reached their lifespan for their tree boxes, so they took it as an opportunity to renovate the memorial. They replaced all the plantings with the original junipers, and then put a circular plinth around the plaza listing the names of the missing and killed in action from this conflict. Over 54,000, 36,000 killed in action, approximately 8,000 missing in action, and another approximately 8,000 Katusas. This was a Korean augmentation to the U.S. Army, Korean citizens who fought alongside us. And so you'll see Korean names mixed in with the American names. The first 84 panels are all private and private first class in the U.S. Army. The last 12 panels are the other 3 branches of the military. So the Army was doing most of the heavy lifting. For every 1 soldier on the ground in Korea, there were 18 people backing them up. Supplies, transportation, communications, medics, chaplains, you name it. And so it was a huge outlaying of effort. There were 1 million casualties amongst the UN forces, which is a huge number for such a short conflict, missing and killed. So take a few minutes to look through the memorial. The restroom is over behind the refreshment stand on the left-hand side. It's sort of a walk and not very convenient, but that's where it is if you need it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'll meet you at the bottom of the ramp in a few minutes.
Okay. Yeah.
I toured with her great grandson
Oh,
a few years
wow.
ago. I got to take his picture with her.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So these are real people.
They are real people.
Okay. I think it's just representations of people. They're actual.
No, they're actual real photographs. They took off any naming, like their name tags, and they put all of the shadows on the right side of their faces, like the sun is coming up from this side. So these are all taken from real photographs. And I understand they asked permission from the soldiers and their families to be included here.
I might regret putting this in video, but I do not know what the Korean War was about or why we were in the Korean War. I really don't. A million people dead is a lot. I don't even know why it happened. This one. Captured. Wounded. Our nation honors her sons and daughters who answered the call to defend a country they never knew and a people they never met. Still water, which represents death in the memorials. And all the names of a lot of people who died. Whole lot. Excuse me.
Forrest Gump found Jenny, right? And it is part of the Lincoln Memorial. Remember, all this land was reclaimed from the river, so this area was very swampy and would flood with the tides and was a source of malaria and things like that. So someone had the brilliant idea to put this large pool here based on the Grand Canal at Versailles. It's nearly a half-mile long, holds about 600,000 gallons of water, and is only about 2.5 feet deep. And it has two purposes: one to reflect the Washington Monument, and the other is to manage water. But it's basically a glorified duck pond. And in fact, Robin Wright did not want to get wet when they were filming that scene, so they built her a platform just under the surface of the water, and she wore hip waders under her costume to film that scene. Every year in March, they drain it and use the big construction brushes to clean it, and then fill it back in for all the ducklings to be born. But in 2023, it was empty for about 6 weeks. They had some plumbing repairs they needed to do, and so people were driving their scooters and bicycles up the length of it. And as it rained, the water would drain to the center, so you could still get a reflection right up the middle of the tidal basin. And it wouldn't be a trip hack tour if I didn't give you a grade on your reflection, and tonight it's like a 4.5. We got a lot of waviness in the water, we got a lot of ducks, it's not very smooth, but in late October I got a 9.9 You could see the windows in the Capitol reflected in the water.
Oh, wow.
It was like glass. There were no ducks, and there was no breeze. I've also seen it when it's been a 1 and it's so windy and choppy you can't see the Washington Monument down the center of it. But it is part of the Lincoln Memorial, which is what you see behind you. The most visited spot in Washington, D.C. We get between 6 and 8 million visitors a year. And we've probably had at least 3/4 of that already this year, at least what it feels like. Only in 2021 did the C&O Canal beat this out for most visited, because 1, we had no tourists, and 2, we'd all been trapped in our houses for a year and we needed to get some fresh air. But Lincoln Memorial is back on top. This building is based on what building from antiquity?
The Colosseum.
Parthenon.
The Parthenon.
Oh,
Parthenon in Athens, but we don't have an Acropolis like they do there. So our designer put it up on a big plinth here, made of Massachusetts granite. The memorial itself is made of Colorado Yule marble. There are 36 columns lining the memorial, representing the 36 states in the Union when Lincoln was assassinated. And above those columns, you'll see the states listed. What order are they listed in?
oh. It's not alphabetical. Huh.
Yes, entry into the Union.
Oh.
So Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maryland, etc. Anytime you see the states listed in Washington, D.C., they're going to be in this order.
Okay.
On the attic frieze above is our 48 states, because there were 48 states in the Union in 1922 when this memorial was completed. Inside, there are 3 rooms. Of course, President Lincoln there is seated in the center room on that big throne. He's 19 feet tall. If he were standing, he'd be 28 feet tall. The sculptor here is a man named Daniel Chester French. Now, Mr. French liked to hide things in his statues. And what we believe he's hidden here is the likeness of Robert E. Lee in the curls on the back of Lincoln's head. Now, this seems maybe a little disrespectful. He never admitted to it, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's also really ironic because if the back of the memorial was open, Lee would be looking across the river to Arlington National Cemetery, and all that land belonged to him before the Civil War. It was his wife's inheritance. She was the daughter of George Washington's adopted grandson. And so Mr. Lee was actually running the plantation at the start of the Civil War. Both sides asked him to serve, and he chose the Confederacy because he couldn't take up arms against his fellow Virginians. And his West Point buddies were really unhappy with him for making that decision. And so they took the property through a tax lien and turned it into a cemetery, burying soldiers right up next to the house so the family cannot move back. In the South Bay, you find the Gettysburg Address. This is Lincoln's most tweetable speech. It's only 3.5 minutes long, quite controversial. People came from far and wide to hear him give it, and he only spoke for 3.5 minutes. The guy who spoke before him spoke for 1 hour and 15. And
Wow.
he said that Lincoln said more in 3.5 than he'd said in the previous hour. Even the famous Civil War photographer Matthew Brady missed the shot. He was busy setting up his camera equipment, and Lincoln was done before he was ready. And you got a picture of him walking away, so you basically got the back of his head. The mural above that speaks to emancipation, one of the main themes of Lincoln's time in office. In the North Bay, you'll see his second inaugural address given just weeks before he was assassinated. Another very succinct speech, very somber. It's about reunifying our country and forgiving and coming back together. And the mural above that speaks to unification. One last thing, we will head up the stairs there on the left. Again, they're building a fabulous museum underneath the stairs here to tell the story of the Lincoln Memorial, because a lot of important things have happened here. And they're going to give us access to the undercroft, which is the basement under the memorial. and there's going to be balconies that look out into it, and the workers left graffiti on the walls and things like that. So it's the coolest space that no one ever gets to see. So we're really excited that that's going to be a part of the museum. But you'll notice as the stairs change color here in the center, you see a gentleman coming down the lighter colored stairs. Right where he's standing is where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech on August 28, 1963. And he's giving the speech that day. There's 250,000 people between here and the Washington Monument. And his speech is kind of falling flat. And Mahalia Jackson was standing behind him. And she said, "Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream." And he launched into that. It wasn't part of the original text, but that's what everyone remembers about that day. She'd heard him give that speech somewhere else. And so a really important moment. And you'll see I Have a Dream carved into the stair there. So let's head up inside.
Okay. I'll do it, so. It's a lot of people. No need to be fancy.
I don't know. Hey, man, this setup, I'm not feeling it.
Yeah, an elevator would be nice. Oh, you don't have to be too fancy about it. Thank you. How far ahead did they get? Oh, there they are.
In the second column from the back and look at the back of his head, and you'll see the nose and the beard sort of in profile on the back of Lincoln's head from this side. And then on the speech over here, the stone carvers made a mistake in the first panel of that speech. It's just below about halfway down. So it's another fun thing to look for here.
Can we just go?
Yeah.
That's good enough to tell.
Oh, I see the nose. You do see the nose. So the curl that like from this spot is just pointing back and slightly angled down. That's the nose. And then the curve above it would be his brow.
Okay, I can see it.
Yeah.
We can't get back to the check. Okay.
I wonder if that is, or if it's just like a thing people.
I like that. It's like whatever it is, right? It's like a fun little legend.
Interesting. What's this speech? Oh, second inaugural address? An estate. Look at that.
Oh, that's so good.
10,000 steps.
When we finish it, we'll go like a swing.
I don't know.
Unless you know.
I do not know.
Here to the Vietnam Memorial, which opened in 1982, just 7 years after the war ended. And the reason for that was a veteran from this war started fundraising before the war was even over. So they had enough money in 1981 to have a competition, and they received over 1,400 anonymous submissions. So many that they had to hold the competition in an airplane hangar over at Andrews Air Force Base.
Oh, wow.
And the winner of the competition was a 21-year-old architecture student from Yale University named Maya Lin. Chinese American, young and inexperienced. And while the design committee loved her design, the president did not. And she had to go before a Senate committee up on Congress and defend her design. Many people called it the black gash of shame or the black gash of death. She described it as a healing wound in the ground. And on it are listed all the missing and killed in action from this conflict, over 58,400 names. What order are the names in on the wall?
Order killed.
Order of death, yes.
Oh, wow.
So the names start at the apex of the V and go up the east wall, circle back around to the top of the west wall, and finish down at the apex of the V again. The memorial was supposed to make no political statement. So the east wall points to the Washington Monument and the west wall points to the Lincoln Memorial. Missing in action are denoted by a cross, killed in action are denoted by a diamond. The panels are numbered east and west because there's books here where you can look up your loved one's name. And so every other panel has dots every 10 rows, so you can count the rows faster to find your loved one's name. There are 5 names on every row, and they continue to add names. And so what they do is they find the space chronologically, and then and fit the name in as close to the time or date of death as they can. So a few of the rows have 6 names on them. You'll notice they're a little bit lighter than the ones that were originally on the wall. when the memorial opens in 1982, the veterans were coming, and the highly reflective black granite again reflects your image in it. And so for these veterans, it was adding to PTSD and survivor's guilt. And they said, what about us? This honors the dead, but we're still alive. So this memorial, the three servicemen statue, was added in 1984 by an artist named Frederick Hart. It's very realistic. You see the veins in their arms, the wrinkles in their clothing, and you'll note the dog tags in their shoelaces. Often Viet Cong would take them as trophies and would often decapitate the soldiers, or perhaps perchance they stepped on a landmine, something could go home to their mothers. So that's why they would separate the dog tags. And so these three young men, African American, Latino, and white, one Marine, 2 Army soldiers, are keeping watch over their fallen brethren here on the wall. Over in the corner of the plaza is a plaque that honors all those who served and got cancer as a result of their service due to things like Agent Orange and things like that.
Yeah.
And anyone added to the wall either was, their remains were discovered, they died as a direct result of the injury that they suffered in the war, or they determined the battle lines have shifted. So there's a panel with 3 names near the bottom, and that was a helicopter crew whose plane went down. They determined inside the battle, the line of battle. So if you'd like to take a look at the statue, please do, and then we'll head down inside the wall.
Wearing his dog tags. It's a plaque, yeah. Got a picture. Vietnam Memorial. Saxophone players playing How Deep Is Your Love Now.
So another question, what's the average age of a Vietnam soldier?
19.
19. A lot of them were being drafted and going straight from high school graduation to boot camp.
Yep.
The youngest person on the wall is 15 years old, and there are 8 women on the wall. Often people leave things behind. Anything directly related to a soldier is kept in an ever-growing warehouse. This is like dog tags, boots, yearbooks, flags. The largest thing left behind is a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, custom designed and left here. And every year for Veterans Day, they read all of the names. It takes 3.5 days, and they do it around the clock, 24 hours a day.
Wow.
To get them all read. It's a convenient experience.
3.5 days. These are the books where you can look up family members' names who died in Vietnam. And code to find them on the wall here.
It's gone through the filter of the Commission of Fine Arts.
Here's the first person who died. John H. Anderson Jr., Early Barnhart Jr., James E. Bates, Garrett L. Blanksmith, Tidal, Basin. Ward F. to follow.
Fourth component of the Vietnam Memorial, the Women's Memorial, and it was added here in 1993 and honors the 11,000 women who served in Vietnam during the war and the 265 women in the armed services at that time period. The three nurses here represent the characteristics faith, hope, and charity. Charity, taking care of the wounded soldier. Hope is the nurse looking for the medic helicopter, and Faith, the one praying over his helmet. And these women were not treated well before or after the war, or during and after the war. They were accused of being adventure seekers, but they volunteered. They weren't drafted like the men, but they were often seeing the worst aspects of the war, the wounded and the dying. And so it's important that they're recognized here. Also, this honors the Red Cross volunteers. I met a woman here who served 2 tours in Vietnam during the war as a Red Cross volunteer. And they were often allowed in the prisoner of war camps and are allowed to provide relief and letters from home and things like that. So they had an important role as well. There are 8 linden trees around the plaza, which honor the 8 women who died. The artist here is a woman named Glenna Goodacre. An important addition here to the Vietnam Memorial. So feel free to take some photos, and then we'll move on to World War II.
Charity. Hope. Faith.
All kinds of weather here in DC, from snow and ice to violent weather. And in fact, on July 2nd, 2021, a small tornado came across the river just north of the MLK Memorial and came through here and knocked over all the porta potties that were set up for the 4th of July, 125 of them in all, and the fencing and everything. And so it was all hands on deck to get things back in shape for the 4th Fortunately, the porta potties were locked and clean, or it would have been a much bigger mess. But these trees took a lot of damage. This one was like bent over at a 90-degree angle.
Oh, wow.
Pine tree here, this just got sheared off 30 feet above the ground. So they are not immune from violent weather. And in fact, it was actually a thunderstorm that put out the fires at the Capitol and the White House when the British set everything on fire. And this was not your typical August thunderstorm. This was like a microburst or a derecho or a hurricane, because it put the fear of God in the British soldiers. They had never seen anything like it. And it put the fires out at the Capitol and the White House. So some providential rain at that point. But I've been down here after some pretty violent storms. We can get violent storms, particularly after a severe heat wave, like over 100 degrees. And last year, the storm caused so much damage that the Arlington Cemetery and the GW Parkway were closed for 4 days.
Wow.
To clean up the tree damage. So it can get rough around here sometimes.
What? I know some people have gotten used to people. Whatever. I know, as I turn around, I'm like, that's cool. I know because he's like, oh shit, no, I know he's looking at me. My life is ruined. Oh, BB, he's like, I know you. Bullshit, she's on that website.
We're gonna horse stables, and they opened last summer and replaced a building that had been built temporarily in 1974. Used by the park police to saddle the horses and things, and they use the horses as for crowd control and patrolling here on the mall. And it was actually George Washington who established the park police. He established a night watchman for the mall, and out of that has evolved the park police. The officer and the horse are a bonded pair, and there's a little exhibit about the history of the park police. It's a little underwhelming, but there are 3 horses that are in residence there, retired park police horses. And so it's a beautiful facility down here, and it's an aspect of the mall that you don't think about.
So what was the mall like back when it was established then? All this stuff wasn't here.
Mostly the other end of the mall. And previously it was, a Victorian landscape. There were trees, there were meandering paths, there was a fish hatchery on the mall, there were railroad tracks crossing the mall because there was a train station where the East Wing and the National Gallery stands today. And so there was a big brick building that was like the Army Medical Center that they tore down to build the Department of Agriculture. And so lots of changes, and the mall that we see today didn't really come into fruition until like the 1940s.
Okay. Interesting. Oh, this is still the reflecting pool. Huh. Hadn't even thought about that. Vermont, Mississippi, Tennessee, Louisiana. What are all these state names here, John? Reeds. Walking sideways to get him in the camera. I could just take this off and film it though.
So we've made it here to the World War II Memorial, and this memorial feels different than the other memorials. We've won this war, so it's very celebratory in nature, and you get that feeling just looking at it. It's centered around these two pavilions, the Atlantic and the Pacific. What do those represent?
The two theaters of war.
Exactly right, the two theaters of war. Of course, we're fighting the Japanese in the Pacific and the Nazis in the Atlantic and in Europe. We also, the plaza is lined with 56 pillars, 48 states and 8 territories at the time of World War II. Each pillar is adorned with 2 wreaths, a wheat wreath and an oak leaf wreath. The oak leaf wreath represents our military might and our industry here in this country, and the wheat wreath represents our agricultural endeavors, as well as all of those who are working toward the war effort who aren't in the military. This was kids saving their pennies, grandparents planting victory gardens, and all the women who went to work in factories as Rosie the Riveters. And they're all tied together with a bronze rope, which signifies the unity in our country at the time of World War II. Everyone was working toward the war effort, and we are a far cry today from the unity of the 1940s here in this country. So let's see, we've got, I believe Washington State is on this side. New Jersey is on the far side, I believe. North Carolina's down here, and I think Maryland's on the far side too. They are, so well done. Inside the pavilion, we've got these 4 columns. They're mounted with eagles, and they're all holding a laurel wreath in their beaks. And in the floor of each pavilion is the victory medal that each of the soldiers received at the end of the war. On the back of that would have been the 4 freedoms that we saw over at the FDR Memorial, celebrating victory in land, victory in the air, and victory at sea.
Oh, nice. So much symbolism. Yeah. Here the water isn't still, it's moving. It's so hard.
Yes, knock them out.
All the states. Look at that. Oh, it's beautiful. North Carolina. The heroism of our own troops was matched by that of the armed forces of the nations that fought by our side. They absorbed the blows and they shared full in the ultimate destruction of the enemy. And you can see the Washington Monument in the Capitol. It's great. so cool.
Doesn't open until 2004.
Oh, wow.
3/4 of the veterans from this war are deceased by that point. And so when veterans come here, they often gravitate toward the theater that they served in. It was rare that a soldier served in both. And they were often elderly, so they're coming in wheelchairs with honor flights and things like that. And so that is why the plaza is so gracious in its size. The designer had two jobs. One was to keep the view from the Lincoln to the Washington Monument, and the other was
There's the Lincoln.
a pool here into the design. So he sunk the memorial 5 feet below grade and pushed the structure out to either side. When you're standing at the Lincoln, you barely notice this is here. It's a brilliant design.
I didn't know at all.
Yeah.
I didn't realize the Lincoln, you can see it from here.
Right. The jets were part of the rainbow pool originally, but the fountains at either end were added. And then this wall behind us here is the center point focus of this memorial. And on this curved wall are 4,048 gold stars, each of which represents 100 soldiers who died in this war. We lost almost 405,000 men in World War II, second only in loss of life to the Civil War. Here we mark the price of freedom, and again, a still pool of water. And the memorial is designed like a military banquet. So the guest of honor sits at the center of the table. Next in line of importance sits to his right. Next in line sits to his left. So we have Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, Massachusetts, or Connecticut, Massachusetts. So the odds are on that side and the evens are on this side. So all of
The Lincoln Memorial all the way over there. And then he's looking right at the Washington Memorial. You can see the Capitol building behind it.
Oh yeah, that's a great one. It's different, you know, but it's fascinating to learn about language. I was talking about the Museum Planet Word. It's all about, it's a museum for language.
Where's that?
It's that's in the Franklin School. Well, it's Franklin Square, so it's sort of north of Gallery Place area, and it's a neat museum. And the building was an old DC school by Adolf Close, who designed the Arts and Industries building and Eastern Market. But he did a lot technologically. It was very technologically advanced. Like there's curved walls behind the teacher, so it would amplify her voice. They had natural air being sucked through the building and big windows for daylighting. And so he was on the forefront of modern technology at the time. It was built in the 1880s or something. But it's a neat museum. Learning about the origin of words. What's from the Latin and what's from the Norse, Scandinavian countries, and how they all blend together and everything. It's pretty fascinating. So you may have seen the fountains in front of either of the pavilions. Listed there are battles from each battlefront, and we're standing on what are the entrance ramps here to the memorial. Again, this opened about 60 years after the end of the war, so most of the veterans were quite elderly. So the shallow rake behind you can gather up a lot of wheelchairs for an event here at the memorial. And in fact, it was Senator Bob Dole who was one of the main fundraisers for this memorial starting in the mid-1990s. And then when Saving Private Ryan came out, Spielberg and Tom Hanks got in on the fundraising efforts, and that's how they were able to hold the competition to build this memorial. And after it was completed, Senator Dole came here over 1,800 times to visit with veterans and their families every Wednesday afternoon as long as he was able. And so when he passed away in late 2021, they had a memorial service for him over at the National Cathedral, and then they came here before they took his remains back to Kansas. It's a beautiful December day, and Tom Hanks gave the eulogy here at the memorial that day. The ramps have these 12 bas-reliefs on both sides telling the story of the war, both here at home and on the battlefront. So we have Pearl Harbor Day being announced on the radio up there. We've got nurses volunteering the inside of a submarine, storming the beach, freeing prisoners of war, and then celebrating VJ Day here on the end. On the far side, we have a war bonds parade, Rosie the Riveters working on planes, parachuters jumping out, and then the generals meeting there in Europe, the Russians and the Americans. It definitely has a different feel than the other ones.
Yeah.
Has become a fan favorite here in Washington, D.C., particularly on those hot summer days when you can come and put your feet in the water here at the memorial. But it's a beautiful memorial and very thoughtful. So we've come to the end of our tour, and it's time to count up our glow sticks and see if we have a winner this evening.